it will be a pretty stream will be about Aristotle. I'm not sure that we're going to get through this whole section. Probably not. Even though discussing it, I think it'll be worthwhile for me to go through anyway, refresh my memory. Spent a lot of time with this text. It comes from Aristotle's book on the Rhetoric. Rhetoric. And, or I have another translation here, different from the one we'll be reading. Art of Rhetoric. So, this is an ancient text. One of the things to know about Aristotle's works that was more or less established, I think, in the 20th century by a philologist, somebody who studies, literally means someone who loves words, but it really meant someone who's a classicist, typically someone who works with ancient texts and tries to correct and modify them and understand them. Required a lot of skill. I think that's a little. Werner Jaeger, who's still very famous. Very famous within the narrow band of people looking at classical texts and perception. But he wrote an enormous series of books, Idea, which is really like a comprehensive account of education in Greek society. But for him, Paideia was broader than just education. They weren't really schools. There kind of were. There eventually were. At Isocrates. But really, education was itself culture. And he understood much of what was happening in Greek culture as a contest over how you should bring up citizens. The various polis. What should their ideals be? Training be? They know about? They not know? This was a great contest. Antique. And rhetoric fits into in an unusual way. So Aristotle was not from Athens, though he lived much of his life from Stagira. Probably not the way they say it. Stagira. Sometimes he's called the Stagirite. Not just saying the name Aristotle. But like many people who were medics, not medics with a D, people, Aristotle knew a little bit about medicine. Main bag. Metics were basically foreign residents in Athens. He wasn't allowed to directly participate. He ended up having a big say because he was the tutor of Alexander the Great. He was not Greek, at least by how the Greeks considered him. He was Macedonian. He tutored Alexander. He had a lot of influence, kind of politics that was to come after, in the period after he. So rhetoric fits into this broad Greek culture, most particularly in Athens, because in Athens there was, of course, the democracy. We hear a lot about democracy. People think about democracy, they maybe think that there's a lot of political orations that are happening, and that's what people. That's maybe part of it, but far more likely, people's experience with rhetoric, with needing some kind of professional assistance, writing biographers, was in the court system. Because there was no lawyer that you could go to advocate on your behalf. You had to defend yourself. And these trials had juries that were extremely large, sometimes thousands of people. You're going to have thousands of people in a trial to defend yourself. And all that had to happen was someone had to accuse you of something. And so some people did this professionally. They were kind of a professional accusators. And they would try to make money from winning these cases. Accuse people, rightly or wrongly. And because of this, because of the highly litigious legal society that Athens had, people really needed to understand something speaking for them. And that's why there kind of grew up these cottage industries of people. There were other reasons too. There were speaking contests. There was Athens was renowned throughout the Greek for its theater. The theater has some. Aristotle often speaks about Homer and the tragedians in the Rhetoric, but a lot of what people were practically concerned with, defending themselves, or how do I accuse someone? These are scenes of civil life, the kinds of things that come out, and some of these documents are preserved of famous orators and the kinds of court cases. And it's all sorts of things. They're very colorful. They're kind of like romantic people who have a mutual lover and violence occurs. They have to go defend themselves. Why it was okay that. Or sometimes it's about property. A lot of times it's about property. Maybe not as often as in the Roman times when it was, but sometimes it's about property. Sometimes it was about whether someone should be shamed or not for a certain kind of religious indiscretion. So really anything, any aspect of life could appear in these court trials. So in order to be prepared to speak, you had to be prepared to speak about it. And Aristotle was teaching his students, these books that we have of Aristotle, Werner Jaeger established, were his lecture notes. So he didn't really write this for publication. Students kind of like took notes on it, and it was later, after it was kind of lost, recompiled. So what we have is, we're not even really sure if this is the correct order that it was delivered in, or if they come from different periods of time. Some people think that this book is like partly his early career, partly his late career. So we have to kind of, we don't have to go really deeply into all of that to understand. What's most interesting is that many people say that this document in Book 2 of the Rhetoric, which is one of the earliest documents that examines systematically human emotion. He lays out not all of the human emotions, and he talks about emotions in other places. In Greek, it's pathe. There's a slightly different connotation, maybe even emotion. He lays out these pathe within Rhetoric, which I think is why there? Why not in a book like De Anima, which is on the soul, maybe the closest thing to psychology? He talks a little bit about emotion. One of the interesting things he says in the De Anima about pathe, that they have two sides to them. You can understand the pathe from what he calls the position of someone who's a natural philosopher, or like a doctor. And from that point of view, and this is maybe closer to how we begin understanding modern society, that the pathos that you're experiencing is anger is blood boiling around the heart. So it's this physical response. But for him, that's an incomplete theory of pathe. Because they also have reasons for your reason for becoming angry. Part of the pathos for Aristotle. And who you are angry at. And what kind of state of mind it puts you. All of those three elements are the rhetorical side of pathe. How it feels is important to understand. But for him, it's not the principal way to understand. I think we tend to feel that emotions are personal, private kinds of experiences. Just the reverse here. These are public emotions. That's why they appear in Rhetoric. And that's why they don't all appear. Because he'll talk about in tragedy, terror, the experience of terror, or of, he does talk about pity, and not so much. So I wouldn't say that this is a complete account of the pathe, but it is a systematic account. It's really broad, and it's really interesting. Everything in here maybe applies to your life today. But it's interesting to kind of compare and say, oh, maybe this gives me a new way to think about emotions, not just because I read directly, but because he takes a perspective that emotions are social, that they're embedded in controversy, that there are different attitudes that people can take to the same kind of scene that's happening out there. That might be helpful for us to understand our own emotions. So without further ado, welcome to the stream. Today we are going to be diving in. This is George Kennedy's translation. I showed you there are other translations. Old-timey. Lots of translations. They all have different merits. They have different kinds of detractions. One of the things I was talking with someone recently about this translation, she was having difficulty teaching it, because sometimes it's just like stays really close to the a little bit too faithful. It makes it hard. It's not so readable. And I think that's probably true. It is a little bit. So, but I think it's good for this kind of a thing, because as we walk through it, not that have completely mastered this, I spent some time with it, so maybe some of those things that might seem I can help. So he just begins by giving a broad introduction, and it actually does book 2, and it's worth reading this part, even though it's not exactly about emotion, which is about ethos. Maybe you've heard that rhetoric is about ethos, pathos. What is this idea? This is Aristotle's. He says these are the three proof, pistis, 3 means for securing belief. And there's been a lot of discussion in the kind of flat-footed, and I would say mostly incorrect version of it is that logos are logical appeal, ethos is kind of character appeal, and pathos is emotional appeal. I don't think this is true. This is not the way to understand what Aristotle's. What he is trying to do is a little bit more complex. And to go back to that other idea of emotion that he set out in one of his logical works. So if the one side was the feeling, the physical feeling, the other side was kind of account of it, what are the reasons that we have for that emotion? He says, really the way to understand that it's a kind of enmattered, kind of in matter, a speech or an argument, almost treats emotion as the kind of argument or judgment, maybe, or account of what's going on in the world as it kind of emerges in the flesh. Kind of a strange idea. So he brings, but he doesn't say that it's not about your body, it's not about how you feel. It is that is a big part of it. It's not the only. You can't understand, except if you understand it as a response to something. At least these social or public emotions. Let's begin with the ethos. These special topics are topoi, Greek, places that you go for arguments. So he's kind of setting these out as sources of argument. Are the proper sources of exhortation and dissuasion, praise and blame, prosecution and defense. Those are the basic genres of rhetoric. Exhortation and dissuasion. This is deliberative rhetoric. What should we do? What shouldn't we do? Praise and blame. This is a big genre called epideictic. What's good and what's bad. And then prosecution and defense. This is the legal rhetoric that is, and everything that's involved. He goes into depth in each of these genres, and these keep coming up again and again. And the kinds of opinions and propositions useful for their persuasive expression. He's kind of listing like a series of opinions. He's not saying these are my opinions. He's saying these are the kinds of opinion that many people, or most people, or people of a certain type have. He kind of sets this out in the book. First part of this. Then we're going to do it again here. You can see chapters 2, the way that Kennedy has introduced propositions about the emotion. So it's a kind of what opinions that people have about emotion that are useful for making arguments. It's a very interesting way to approach the subject. Kind of an old word for this genre is called doxography. When you write down the opinions that people tend to have about. Usually, maybe if you're in class or you're asking to write, people will say, can I include my opinion? People don't even think they can include their own opinion. There's some weird teaching that has been, don't use the first person pronoun, like these strange rules, very strange rules. An even weirder genre would say, I'm going to write down all of the opinions I can find, ones that agree or disagree. I'm just going to write them all down and assemble them. And then people can look through it and say, well, what are the kinds of things people believe? Who would that be useful for? Well, it'd be useful for someone who's trying to persuade other people. That's what he's. There's more that could be said about it. Let's not get too specialized. But since rhetoric is concerned with making a judgment, people judge what is said in deliberation. Judicial proceedings are also a judgment. He kind of leaves out epideictic there, praise or blame. But you could say also, yeah, that person praiseworthy or blameworthy, same kind of judgment. It is necessary not only to look to the argument, that it may be demonstrative, I showed you the proofs, and persuasive, but also for the speaker to construct a view of himself as a certain kind of person and to prepare the judgment. For it makes much difference in regard, especially in deliberations, but also in trials. The speakers seem to be a certain kind of person that his hearers suppose him to be disposed toward them in a certain way. In addition, if they too happen to be disposed in a certain way. Now, this seems very strange. I recently was hanging out with philosophers. All right, I'm going to try. Sorry. I was hanging out with some philosophers, and you can actually find that video on Ask a Philosopher Twitch stream. And we were talking about this problem. Why should it matter who I am? If what I'm saying is true, if I can justify my beliefs, why should it matter who I am? And there's a kind of one ideal of, let's say, science or objectivity, in which it's precisely it not mattering who I am. But in reality, people do really take this. And they were kind of thinking about this effect that's been well documented, that if you tell someone that they have to believe something because it's true, they tend to double down and believe in even more strongly. And you can think about, if you think about belief as being derivative of trust, that the first kind of thing that we believe isn't a proposition. It's not the first kind of thing we don't believe in is a theory. The first kind of thing we have to believe, even as base, before we speak, other people, because we have to trust them. If that really is at the kind of psychological part of all belief, it matters who the person, not just that, whether it doesn't even just matter whether what they're saying is true. It matters whether I want to have a relationship in some way. This is very weird. I mean, if you only had a kind of completely rational view of, maybe this would seem like a flaw. Human beings can't get over feelings about other people, except made clear to them. But I don't know how you feel about it. For me, I think it's not necessarily a way that human beings make judgment about what is important to them. And what's important to us isn't a question of fact. What we identify with isn't a question of fact. So ethos, extremely important. The kind of person you present yourself to your audience, extremely important. So for the speaker to seem to have certain qualities is more useful in deliberation. For the audience to be disposed in a certain way is more useful in lawsuit. So for him, that's the distinction between ethos and pathos. Pathos is just the audience being disposed towards a story. And in deliberation, which is about the future, you have to trust me more. Trust me, the person, more. So that's really closer to the all throughout here. For things do not seem the same to those who are friendly and those who are hostile, nor the same to the angry and the calm, but either altogether different or important. To one who is friendly, the person whom he passes judgment seems not to do wrong. So when we're making the judgment about what's good or bad, same kind of judgment that's required. Well, it's my friend. No, is that bias? Would there be some objective way to make it bad? I don't think so. I think that kind of judgment, you can say that it's biased, right? And we don't want to just kind of ignore what our friends do. We want to be able to make a judgment that friends do bad. But obviously, we're going to be kind of swayed towards, because we're going to think about all the other good things it does, and that will color our judgment. One who is hostile, the opposite. Okay. And to a person feeling strong desire and being hopeful, something in the future is a source of pleasure, fears that it will come to pass. Good. To an unemotional person, one in a disagreeable state of mind. Now, here's the key bit of this passage on get into. There are three reasons why speakers themselves are in themselves persuasive. Those are the three things we trust other than logical demonstration. These are practical wisdom, phronesis, virtue, arete, goodwill. For speakers make mistakes in what they say through failure to examine all or one of these. For either through lack of practical sense they do not form opinions, or through forming opinions rightly they do not say what they think because of a bad character. They're lying to us. Or they are prudent and fair-minded but lack goodwill. But it is possible that people not to give the best advice, although they know what it is. So you can think about it this way. People are asking, first of all, do you know, not just do you know like the facts of this particular, are you the kind of person that knows the kinds of things that I feel are necessary to trust someone on? You know your way in out around the neighborhood. You might have the Google Maps up. You might be able to tell me exactly how to. But okay, at that point, I'm still gonna want to know someone who's like, yeah, that is the path there, but you have to know that that path has, there's some danger there. There's been construction there for someone who knows the neighborhood. Is someone I'm more likely to trust, even if someone else can say, no, I have the facts here. Virtue. Well, are you trying to like pull one over on me? Are you trying to lead me somewhere where you can rob me? And then goodwill. How is this different from virtue? Goodwill. Well, maybe you are kind of well-intentioned person, but for somebody else. Maybe you're not my ally. Like you might be a good person, but there are good people on the other. There are Spartans out there. Athenians, maybe we respect the Spartans, even though they're our enemies. So are you kind of a Spartan person? Are you more in league with them? Or do you have my best interest? These are big questions for all scenarios where there's delay. And even when there's not delay. Or either through lack of practical sense. These are the only possibilities. Aristotle likes to write these kinds of things. This is exhaustive. There's no other possibility. I don't know what you think. Maybe you can find what would be important other than these. That's what he said. Therefore, a person seeming to have all these qualities is necessarily persuasive to the. If someone believes that you're a good person, that you know what you're talking about, that you have their best interests in mind, what reason would they have to doubt you? Kind of the point. The means by which one might appear prudent and good are to be grasped from the virtues. You need to understand how people make judgments about virtues in order to appear that way. And I don't think Aristotle says just appear that way. He's like, it's not enough to be prudent, because you can be prudent and not know how to appear prudent. You have to be and seem that way. For a person would present himself as being of a certain sort, same sources that he would use to present another person. How would you introduce your friend as prudent? Well, you need to kind of do that for yourself. You can't just claim it about yourself. And goodwill and friendliness need to be described in emotions. We'll get to those. Eunoia, one of the emotions, athe. A weird one. We maybe wouldn't think about goodwill as an emotion, which is maybe why emotions is not the best translation of athe. Athe comes from pathos, which literally means like to suffer, be affected by. Be affected by what? The outside world, the matters of life, the affairs and concerns, my daily business. And so it's not just emotions in the sense of sad, I'm happy. It's the way that the things I am concerned with affect me. And that's, in some sense, a broader description of the emotion, what we would usually think. And it also excludes something. It might be like very private, or emotions the things that I'm very interested in. Hey, what's up, alien? Emotions that you feel that you're not sure what it's really. Aristotle's not that concerned here, at least. Those kinds of feelings. There is a need. Okay, so the emotions or pathe are those things through which, by undergoing change, people come to differ in their judgment. So why don't people see the same scene? People look at President Trump coming out of the hospital saying he's a hero. He defeated the virus. Other people are saying it's extremely irresponsible. But how do people differ in their judgment? Aristotle's theory is that they undergo a change the way that they are affected by that in pathos, what leads them to differ in their, and they are accompanied by pain and pleasure. That there's pain and pleasure in the pathos. For example, anger, pity, fear, other such things. There is need to divide the discussion of each. Here's the big kind of new theoretical framework or scaffold that he has for the emotions. Each of them have kind of key moments. For example, in speaking of anger, what is their state of mind when people... It's not just the blood boiling around the heart, though there was some discussion of what thinking happened to the heart or the... That's a debate that went on in the ancient world for a long time. But it's not just that the blood is boiling there, but really in my thoughts. How am I affected when people are angry? And against whom are they usually angry? What's the kind of... They wouldn't... This is a term that comes much later, the word object. But what's the object of my... You can also say, what's the subject of my... I have the same idea. Here. Shows the weird kind of thing. Against whom are they usually angry? And for what sort of reasons? Those reasons are part of the emotions. So when you hear people say, oh, people who are emotional are not rational, maybe that comes not from the fact that there's a whole long history to that argument. From Aristotle's point of view, there are reasons within every emotion. Every emotion has its reason. Whether they're good reasons or not, that's something to be debated. People have good reasons when they're unemotional. People have bad reasons when they're unemotional. So something being emotional doesn't necessarily tell us very much about whether it's reasonable or unreasonable. But it does have reasons for people. This is one of the axioms of Aristotle's. Or if we understood one or two of these, but not all, it would be impossible to anger. He's trying to think about, like, how do we make someone angry? I'm going to tell you a story that I want you to get angry about. Maybe it's a kind of political injustice that happened. Maybe I'm defending myself in court against someone who falsely accused me. I have to understand what makes people angry in order to make you angry. So there's a practical side, historical interest in it. And similarly, in speaking of other emotions, just as we have drawn up a list of propositions, on the subjects discussed, let us do so about these and let us analyze in the way mentioned. Excuse me. So as Kennedy says, I'm not going to read this. He says, these famous chapters on the emotion, although reflecting some ideas of Plato, are the earliest systematic discussion of psychology. That's a big saying. He gives a really long introduction. He was particularly... I think everybody that reads Aristotle's Rhetoric closely, when you get to this part of book 2, it's like, whoa, it can kind of blow your mind. I know that I've had students in the past where I've told, wow, I want more of this going on here. But it's not an easy text. I think one of the ways to get it to kind of affect you is to work through and try to understand it in more than one way. Because if you just read it as a kind of dead ancient text, you'll focus on all the things that seem strange or weird or even offensive in this. But we allow it to kind of mean more than one thing. Maybe it can really affect us and maybe even help us understand our own relationship. So this is an interesting. At the 1990 Symposium Aristotelicum, Pierre Aubanque, maybe, I don't know, drew attention to the following passage in Martin Heidegger, big famous philosopher. The different modes of state of mind and the ways in which they are interconnected in their foundation cannot be interpreted in the problematic investigation. Phenomena have long been well known ontically under the terms affect, feelings, always been under consideration in philosophy. It is not an accident. Earliest systematic interpretation of affect that has come down to us is not treated in the frame of psychology. Aristotle investigates affect in the second book of his Rhetoric. Contrary to the traditional orientation, this work by Aristotle must be taken as the first systematic hermeneutic of the everydayness, Eglichkeit, the everydayness of being with one another. It's an undesigned everydayness of being with one another. Be like a everydayness of being. That's what's being. Not the passions as they appear in the great tragedy. He does talk about, but the kind of mundane passion that things arise between who are living together. Have to be a sin. It was in this case. Publicness, Öffentlichkeit, as the kind of being which belongs to the they, das Man. What you know what they say when we say they that way. Not only has in general its own way of having a mood, but needs mood, makes them for. This is kind of a weird idea. The idea that nothing can be public in a neutral way. There's always a kind of mood, like, that feeling of what's happening, kind of vague. Wow, things are getting dark. Things out there. Sometimes people refer to it as the news. News is bad. That's kind of this mood develops from discourse. They feel, they say. A they that includes. This is what he's talking. It is into such a mood, out of such a mood. We're speaking to people that are disposed in a certain way at a certain moment in time. We're not speaking to kind of pure intellect that exists in some rarefied realm of ideas. We're speaking to people who are affected by things that have been said already before we get up to speak. By what's in the news, what's in the air. He must understand the possibilities of movement in order to rouse them and guide them. So that was a little bit of an introduction, and now we're finally going to get into the specific emotion. Aristotle. I think maybe I can probably zoom in a little bit. I wonder if that will do a little. Still not. I'm still gonna. First, chapter 2, first of the emotions, orge, or anger. One of the things you might keep in mind is, like, are these emotions well translated? Are they the same? Or is orge a kind of emotion that doesn't exist? Maybe emotions also have history, I believe. I'm a historian of emotion in some. But emotions also have history. The kinds of, if they include all of these other things, if they're not just what we feel in our bodies, they include the reasons and the kinds of people we get angry at and the state of mind, that all of that stuff might be in by the historical contingencies and conditions of life that change over time. It means that maybe the actual emotions change over time. And some people would go even further. And so therefore the feelings also change, which I happen to agree with. I don't think that they always radically change. They're a little different. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that with anger, because I have a later text here. So we're making very slow. Let anger be, and he defines each of the emotions. Let anger be defined as desire. Just stop there. Anger be defined as desire. You typically begin by thinking. Maybe we begin by thinking about anger as heat, or as something bad that happened. Here's what he says: anger is desire, accompanied by distress, for apparent retaliation, because of an apparent slight. See how he uses apparent there? There's a good reason why. That was directed without justification against oneself or those near to one. Already a lot in here. So anger for him always comes from an insult, some kind of mark against my dignity. Now, if I'm in a fair fight, then would I not be angry? If I think that I do something wrong and someone insults me, but I feel that it's justified, why not get? I think according to Aristotle, he would say, yeah, no, you wouldn't. Anger can only emerge if you have a certain kind of dignity. And when that dignity is insulted, slighted, At least apparently so. Maybe it was an accident, but it appears to me that then I get angry. Sometimes I use the example. If I'm sitting in a train car, things that people used to take. Maybe aliens. Sitting in a train car and as filing in, somebody steps on my foot. And I look up and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't see your foot." I might still be like, I was a little careless of that. But I think I would be more angry if someone kind of stomped on my foot and they're like, and they walked away. Because that would feel like they were not just, even though the pain would be the same, maybe physical pain, the lack of respect for my dignity as an, that would anger me more, I think. Or even if they didn't, even if in one case I had pain, someone accidentally steps on my foot, and in another case someone tries to step on my foot, misses, I think I would still be more angry in the second case. So this I think this makes some sense. If this is what anger is, necessarily the angry person always becomes angry at some particular individual. What about getting angry at traffic? Do you agree or disagree? Is it always at some particular individual? Because if I'm being slighted, I'm not being slighted by traffic. At least not from Aristotle's. You sometimes get angry at unintentional harm if it's like negligent. Yeah, I think that that's totally reasonable. I think that many people feel that. So it makes me wonder whether Aristotle's definition is narrow. Yeah, but you still like if it was a complete accident that was unavoidable, I wonder if we would get angry. It's still the sense that someone like, you didn't take me enough into consideration in preparing. So even though you didn't tend to harm me, kind of slight me by not having fully taken into consideration the possible consequences of action. If it's something that's like completely, if we believe it's completely unavoidable, I wonder if we would get. I don't know. Maybe we would. Maybe things aren't as neat as Aristotle wants. And a kind of pleasure follows all experience of anger from the hope of getting retaliation. Now, again, this is a society where religion is very, and the gods sometimes seek revenge as well, quite often. And I wonder if, like, maybe religious traditions like Christianity, Islam, have changed this. People would feel it would be less appropriate in public to express the desire of revenge. Maybe not, though, because I think a lot of times I see Muslims and Christians pretty publicly seeking revenge against each other. And the context of your mood matters a lot. Yeah, this is all about context. This is basically big kind of contextual outlining of Athe. But I think that even the context maybe changes. What kinds of contexts are appropriate for emotions, I think is very different probably today than it was in Athens when he was writing 4th century. But yeah, so then he says this weird thing. Thus it has been well said of rage, thumos, which Plato made part, like one of the 3 parts of the soul, thumos. So it might not just be rage, it's some kind of like liveliness, but it is close to anger. The word mood, English, comes from the word mov in Old English, which means mind, but it also means anger. So you can think of it in an ancient society, anger maybe has a different function than it does in a kind of industrial or post-industrial. It depends on society. There's another great book. Do I have it around here? Which is called Never in Anger, which is about an anthropologist who went to a culture in the Arctic Circle, and she displayed anger against someone outside of the tribe she thought wasn't respecting them, and then they totally shunned her and her hypothesis is that because there are so few people, there just aren't literally very many people, and like the bonds between people are so important because everything is really high stakes in this climate that is very cold, that anger is a threat to the entire community. So that the attitude of the community towards anger is that's extremely taboo. Maybe it's different in a society where rage is maybe part of what you need to preserve what you see as your society. You need to kind of train people to be warriors and soldiers to defend the city. Maybe partly that context is cultural. Maybe a lot of it is. So a kind of pleasure follows from this. Oh yeah, so he says, of rage, a thing much sweeter than honey in the it grows in Homer. Yeah, it's from the Iliad, which is a song about the wrath of Achilles. Right? The Greeks had a whole epic poem about anger. Sing to me, O Muse, wrath of Achilles. That's how the Iliad begins. I'm paraphrasing. Kind of pleasure follows from this, and also because people dwell in their minds on retaliating. The kind of time spent in this fantasy of revenge gives. Then the image is, it's hard to translate this word, fantasia. I could say quite a bit about this, but for Aristotle, fantasia is both a kind of what we would maybe mean by imagination, but also it does many more things. When you see shapes in the clouds, that's also an act of fantasia. When an animal imagines that there's or like identifies something really as like water that would quench their thirst, the inference of like visual stimulus to that will solve my problem of being thirsty, that's also fantasia. Animals have anything that moves has imagination, really, according to Aristotle, or any living organism that not like this. I don't think he. But anyway, that's a little in the weeds. Then the image that results creates pleasure, as in the case of dreams. Pretty wild stuff. You ever have a dream that you woke up from where, I mean, I've had very violent dreams that I've woken up from that have made me deeply unsettled for the rest of the day, sometimes several days. But I think that I've also probably had dreams that are violent, that do give you pleasure. Kind of that person finally gets what's coming to them. This is the desire. Ethos, anger itself. Belittling is an actualization of opinion. See, this is where the translation is like a little bit too close to the Greek. No one would say that you actualize, but it's kind of what the Greek is saying. That you could also say that it's taking a kind of judgment and making it public, making it appear in the world. So I can have like negative judgments about people and kind of smile. If I actualize my opinion, what that means is I show it for public to other people. Belittling is an actualization of opinion about what seems worthless. We think both good and bad things worth serious, also things that contributed to them. Whatever amounts to little or nothing, we see worthless. So there might be really bad things like, wow, there's a virus we need to study. But something that is contemptuous is not even something that's really bad. It's something that's beneath our control. And that's what slighting is here. Belittle. To put someone down and say, you're not even worth my time. But a lot of times this is a show. Because when people make a show of contempt, obviously they are concerned with that. They don't completely. And there are 3 species of belittling. This is Aristotle for you. Like, here are all of the kinds of belittling. Contempt. Cataphronesis. Remember, phronesis was practical wisdom. This goes against that. Greek understanding. Spite and insult. Hubris, you've heard. Hubris is again, these are hard terms to translate. I think he did a fine job. But hubris, maybe is broader than just insult. Anyway, there are different varieties of it. For one who shows contempt belittles. People have contempt for those things. And they belittle things of no account. So too, the spiteful person. So too, the spiteful person. The spiteful person is an impediment to another's wishes. Not to get anything himself, but so that the other does not. I mean, think of it like that is a good definition of spite, I think. Where I'm like, I'm doing it out of spite, meaning it's not an advantage to me. I just want to see you suffer. I just want to see your pain. Since then, there is no gain for himself, he belittles. Clearly, he does not suppose the other will harm him, or he would be afraid and would not belittle. So it's this kind of complicated gesture. When I do something out of spite to make sure that you suffer, I also am showing that I'm also showing contempt for you, belittling you, because I wouldn't do that if I thought that you could effectively retaliate. You're not like even a worthy enemy. So I can just kind of, in my free time, make your life more difficult, just for my pleasure. It's a gesture of superiority. Even though it does kind of make people seem, when you reflect on spite as spite, it does make people seem petty. Which, what does that literally mean? Petit, small. Complex gesture. It depends on, like, side of it you're on. Nor that the other might benefit him in a way worth mentioning. For then he would be taking thought so as to become a friend. And for Aristotle, there are friendships of virtue, but there's also friendships of. Friendships are kind of more like alliances, civil alliances in the cities between people who are equals. So I might have a friend that I don't think that much of. I'm allied with them. I know that nobody watching the stream would ever expect that, though. We're much more. The person who gives insult also believes. For insult is doing and speaking in which there is shame to the sufferer. Shame to the sufferer. Not that some advantage may accrue to the doer because something has happened, but for the pleasure. For those reacting to something do not give insult, are retaliating. Are you mad online? Isn't that a lot of like what happens in online discourse? Which is you provoke someone to see them get really mad, and then by not caring about their reaction, tending to not care about their reaction, not engaging them as an equal, you're making a gesture of superiority. And this works even when the person's anonymous, even when both parties are anonymous. Trolling. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of that analysis of trolling? Do you think it's like this? Kind of like spite? I don't know. I think it is. I think it's kind of the idea of showing your superiority. I think it's a lot about being superior. So it's anger, but it's an anger that I'm imposing on someone else in order to kind of show maybe my control of them, my ability to kind of move them like a puppet master. Ha ha ha. It's so easy to make you angry. But also to say that I don't even gain any. It's precisely because I don't gain anything out of it that it works as a gesture of. I think a lot of people are confused about trolling. They're like, oh, these people are surely getting something out of it. Maybe they're Russian agents. But trolling is more like intentionally causing chaos. I think that's one version of trolling. I mean, sometimes people just kind of like try to muddy the waters. But I think in that sense, maybe it's a kind of spite against a whole vision of the public, of the kinds of things that people are concerned with, that you're showing contempt by saying, like, look how easily we can get the news anchors, news media to report on this stuff that we just made up. Yeah, I don't know if it doesn't have any ulterior motives, but I would say that it doesn't have any advantage to the person doing it. And again, that's part of the gesture of why it makes you. Aristotle, this old-timey document, I think can help us better understand some of the complex emotional responses that people are having when people really are confused because maybe they don't act out of spite a whole lot. Good, pious people. And so they're less kind of attuned to the fact that not gaining advantage from it angry, precisely the point of. So the cause of pleasure to those who give insult, they think themselves become more superior by ill treating others. That is why the young and the rich are given to insult. Oh, the young and the rich, these are two separate classes. But if you're rich and young, oh boy. For by insulting they think they are superior. Dishonor is a feature of insult, and one who dishonors belittles. For what is worthless has no repute, neither for good nor evil. Thus Achilles, when angered, says, Agamemnon dishonored me for taking my prize. He keeps it. And as a reason for his anger, he treats me like a dishonored vagrant. So, if you remember hey, welcome to the stream, talking about anger and Aristotle and trolling and all sorts of things. And in the Iliad, kind of place that it begins is Achilles is kind of, even though he's the great hero of the Iliad, he's kind of being a sound, kind of like not really fighting in the war. And they're like, oh God, Achilles, we're losing the war because you're not fighting. He's the best warrior. And what he's upset about is that Agamemnon, who's kind of the king and leader, they're all kind of kings. It's a weird system. Took Briseis, who was really just like a woman that they captured. It's a little bit complicated. Achilles thought that he should be with this woman, Agamemnon. Well, I'm not going to fight until I'm honored properly. That's the so Aliens is saying trying to devolve the discussion to something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think why. I mean, if we think about that in terms of spite, like what are people saying they're superior? To me, it's maybe it's a kind of the French sociologist. What's his name? Begins with a D. This is why people don't want to do live streams. It'll come to me later. Can't think of it. But he wrote a whole book on suicide, and he was trying to explain like why does suicide happen in modern society. His theory was something called anomie, which again comes from the Greek nomos, a lack of order, and people are kind of like lost in these advanced society. And an anomie is this kind of weird modern feeling. And I think that maybe one of the kinds of ways that it's different, the kind of spite or contempt that happens in the city-state, as Aristotle has already said, is always directed towards an individual. In anomie, it's not clear who has made me feel. And so at the same time, I want to kind of vent my spleen or my spite against society at large. And the kinds of things that the respectable people, that what the bourgeoisie care, I'll show them. And so kind of, sometimes this results in great art, Salon de Réfusé, where Manet begins like modern painting, all of the things that were rejected from high society, from Académie. But sometimes it also results in acts of violence or acts of just chaos. But I think it does kind of come down to, it is a broadening of Aristotle's definition of belittling because we live in a different kind of society. But I think that there's that same element is just that it's not about an individual. It's about this kind of personified idea of, kind of jokerfied idea of, we live in a society. That kind of society becomes this people identify in different moments where when they are malcontents, discontent, sometimes some people will be motivated, therefore, to sow chaos. Therefore, make something less civilized, make it seem more like what belongs to them. They don't identify with hoity-toity. And people think they are entitled to be treated with respect by those inferior birth. That was a big thing in ancient society. From a good family, it's still a big thing, but maybe in a lot of society, people try to pretend it really is in power, in virtue, and generally in whatever they think themselves have much of. So if I'm really rich, I think that people that have less money than me should. If I'm really smart, I think that people that I think are less smart should. So this is a kind of analysis of narcissism, almost, right? For example, in regard to money, a rich man thinks himself superior to a poor man. In regard to speech, an eloquent one thinks himself one unable to express himself. But the thing is that it's superior in every respect. So a rich man is superior to a poor man in terms of money. The rich man thinks of himself as superior in terms of everything, because for him, money is the most important. I think that's the argument. Thus, it has been said, great is the rage of Zeus nurtured, but still, even afterward, has resentment. That's a hard one to get out of context. You really don't. For they are vexed by their sense of ignored superiority. If you think you're really great at something, you think that you've been... Recently, I listened to the Talking Sopranos podcast. It's a little bit of embarrassing, but it's actually a pretty good podcast. It just kind of goes through it recaps the Sopranos episode, but also has some of the actors and producers and costume designers on. And David Proval, who's one of played Richie Aprile, he gave a great performance. They asked him, like, how did you find motivation to be so scary, so evil, so angry? And he said, I thought about how I had been overlooked by the film industry for so many years, for people who were less talented. Used that resentment that he didn't make public. He used that resentment in order to fuel this role of this psychopathic mafia dude. Great role. So, that ignored superiority. Furthermore, a person feels belittled by adverse remarks or actions of those by whom he thinks he should be well treated. These are those whom he has treated well in the past or is treating well now. So there's some kind of reciprocity there. Or those whom he wants or has wanted to treat. That's an interesting little addendum there. I wanted to treat you well, so you should treat me well. I mean, I don't really know exactly what that's referring to. I think I know people like I'm not I don't really know exactly what he if you have an idea, let me know. So this, of course. So what was this all about? Remember, there are 3 parts to every emotion. 3 parts to every. This is the definition and causes of anger. Now we're getting into the state of mind of the people who become angry. We have the causes of anger. Then what is it? What is going on in the thoughts of the people? A little bit different than the causes. It is now apparent from this what is the state of mind of those who become angry, and at whom and for what sort of reason they do so. So even though you get one element of it, it kind of you can derive from the causes of anger what the state of mind would be, against whom. You can kind of, but he's going to still lay it out and make it really explicit for us. The answer to the first question is they become angry whenever they are distressed. Okay, that's for the person who is distressed, desires something. And here, what do they desire? They desire some kind of retaliation, some kind of satisfaction. Revenge. I will have my satisfaction of a desire for revenge. If then someone directly opposes him, for example, preventing his drinking when he is thirsty, and even if not directly, nevertheless seems to accomplish the same thing, and if someone works against him and does not cooperate with him and annoys him when so disposed, he becomes angry at all these. So Aristotle's making an interesting move here. He's like, though the cause of your anger might be that person who slighted you, now it starts to spread out in a different direction to anybody who opposes my will. Surely you've experienced this. Get angry at something, you haven't yet exacted your revenge, but you have to go on with your daily life. And then there are all these little indignities through the day. Start to grind your gear. Talking about it. And it's all those little moments where things don't go your way. I often have this, I live in Boston, when something like bad happens at work, when I feel like I had a day at work where things are wrong, then I start to get really angry about driving and parking and all of these things around the car. Oh, more construction. When in fact, like, the construction's a good thing. Probably like keeping the city safer, the pipes need to be, like, in a calmer mood I can assess that. As I'm driving around, after these other things, I start to become little pressures on what I want to do. Make that green light. As a result, those who are ill, in need of money, in the middle of battle, in love, thirsty, in general, those longing for something and not getting it, are irascible, easily stirred to anger, especially against those belittling their present condition. So if you are in love, it's not reciprocated, or you haven't made it clear yet, and your friends start making fun of you, right? That can make you really angry. Any kind of desire, unfulfilled desire, lead us to anger. Interesting connection. That might not be so obvious. Feels like it doesn't spread as much as it stacks on it. Aggressive essence. Yeah, that's kind of the Konrad Lorenz theory, aggression. This is a really popular book back in the 60s. He had this kind of theory of aggression based on animal ethology. I'm pretty opposed to it. He actually put in a diagram of like a toilet overflowing, and it's this hydraulics model of emotions. And I think that one of the things that I prefer about the Aristotelian theory to that, which almost every theorist of the emotions, from Descartes to Freud to Darwin to Lorenz, all sorts of other people, there's a big long tradition, have more or less kind of endorsed some of those views of that kind of the quantitative pressure that builds, especially when they think about anger or aggression, is that even in the cases when that's true, when there is something building up, it needs to kind of come out in a scene where there's some reason. And it's a reason that, someone who's very prone to anger might be, as we say, kind of have a happy trigger. they're easily hair thin trigger or something like that. There's some phrase I can't, but they still need that meaningful event that happens. Ah! So it never is simply an overflow of that pressure. That pressure needs to find something out in the world. That's the Aristotelian that I think reminds me of Yoda's quote: "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger." Yeah, I expected this. It comes up almost every time we talk about it because Aristotle also will talk about hate, and it's interesting to kind of compare the Yoda theory of fear and hate, or fear, anger, and hate to, because here Aristotle functions very differently. He has a lot of some positive things to say, but I think anger can lead to hate. The difference for Aristotle is that anger is about wanting retaliation or revenge against an individual. In hate, I want the destruction of someone. I want them to not exist. So for him, it's revenge for a specific act, anger or orge. Hatred is against my enemies, people who's not just for something they did, but for who and what they are. They need to be gone. That's hatred. But we'll get there. Like a balloon, so expansion increased pressure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's another view of that's less hydraulics and more gaseous, like, metaphor. Those metaphors we feel that, right? You can feel the pressure building up, the stress building up, and sometimes it feels like it overflows. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, why that metaphor comes from modern theories of emotion. But again, my reason for referring or kind of emphasizing as a counterweight, not against that, but as something to remind us, is that the reason those things are building up is always because there's something meaningful happening in our life. It's not just random stressors. Can there be hormonal effects? Can diet, can air quality, can all of these things affect? Yes. But even when you kind of press on somebody's brain and it triggers a laughter response. When you ask them later, why did you laugh? They don't say because you pressed on my brain. They say because his face looked funny. People, even if they do it after the case, even after the response, people have to understand their own emotions through things that happen in the world, meaningful to them. And when you have an emotion, and this is actually what I write about and what I study, what happens when you have those emotions and you don't know what they're about? That can be a very distressing condition. That's not like the normal situation. So when people have theories of emotion that those things aren't the real causes. The real causes are the hormones in your body. That's fine. I mean, I'm fine with that. But I don't think it really helps us to understand how emotional life works, because no one is satisfied. If someone's grieving, don't worry, your hormones will change soon. I mean, that's just cold. It doesn't understand emotion as something that is lived. That's just this understanding emotion as a natural phenomenon. And I think that's actually a misunderstanding. And we said in the beginning of the stream that Aristotle recognized both sides of that. And he thought that they were complementary. From a natural physician or a natural philosopher would see emotions just as kind of a response in the body. But you need this whole kind of scene of life in order to understand. Further, a person is easily stirred if he happened to be expecting the opposite. So if you you walk into a room, you're like, oh, it's so good to see you again. Someone's like, how dare you step in here, right? Like, that's shocking. What is the take on something happens that's not from a tree falls on your car? I'm guessing it's the same. It's a good question. We did talk a little bit about that too. About how things maybe are different for us. I could go on a long kind of answer to this question, which would be about how we kind of give agency to. When I used to like bang into a table when I was young, my mom would come over to the table and say, bad table, or something like that. It would make me feel a lot better. It still does. Even though I know that it isn't a person, that the feeling of like, table got punished, giving those things agency. You ever get angry at your car and you kind of like slam on the window? It's not that you think the car is alive. You do kind of endow it with agency in a certain way in order to like complete an emotional response. Because that emotional response needs to almost personify something. Needs that fiction. But I think that on the other hand, something really seemed totally unavoidable to us, and we really resisted the personification of the tree on the car. Maybe the emotion would be different. Maybe it wouldn't be anger. It would just be kind of frustration, weariness, sadness. Spinoza describes sadness as the feeling of the loss of one. So, if you if you weren't going to go like stupid tree, how dare you, kind of make it anger. If you're just going to say like, wow, how little power I have in the world, kind of more sad sacky, like Spinoza, just feel the loss of your power, sadness, kind of retreat a little bit further away from the world. I don't know. I think it's different for different. I don't think that this document describes how people actually feel and act in every society. I think it's interesting new view on them, other than something are kind of locked within our skin. That I don't think is a very helpful. Okay. So if he happened to be expecting the opposite treatment, for the quite unexpected hurts more, just as the quite unexpected also delights, what is desired comes. So what's surprising is more intense. We all know how it feels when someone dies unexpectedly. That kind of grief is different than someone. Same thing. Happy goes your way. Weren't expecting. Oh wow, there's $20 in that old jeans pocket. It's really not on the same level. Yeah. So from this, then, it is evident what seasons and times and dispositions and are easily moved to anger, and where and when, and that when people are more in these conditions, they are also. Is it evident? I feel like Aristotle. We said these are his lecture notes. Be quite telegraphic, anachronistic metaphor. What is he really trying to say? Well, if someone is inclined to think of themselves as superior and is in a position where other people are not inclined to see them, they're likely to get angry. People so disposed, so those at whom people become angry. I think that's one of the concepts. Those at whom people become angry, people so disposed, then are easily moved to anger, and then become angry at those who laugh at them and scoff and mock. Laughter. There's a deep truth. Laughter makes us angry. Laughter makes us more angry. The laughter of our enemies at us. Worse than being kind of directly engaged in conflict. You don't feel like you're an equal. I mean, even if you're an enemy, if you're directly engaged in a conflict, some kind of equality there. Laughter is being shamed and made to submit. This kind of. Necessarily, these actions are of the sort that are not in response to earlier by the sufferer, not beneficial to those, for only then does it seem they are done through hubris. And people become angry at them, speak badly of, and scorn things they themselves take most seriously. For example, at those taking pride in philosophy, if someone speaks against philosophy, or taking pride in their appearance if someone attacks their appearance, similarly in other cases. So when we talked before about your dignity is kind of tied up in the things that you care. If you make a Star Wars mention, and I just go, yeah, Star Wars is a terrible movie. Wait a minute. It kind of offends you because your personhood, your dignity, and your judgment and desires are tied up, are identified. This is pretty obvious. This is what makes people, because they feel that they're insulted when you attack something that they like. They're identified with. They do this much more if they suspect they do not really have what they take pride in. So maybe somebody who's a little bit fragile, more psychoanalytic. I love Star Wars, but I agree it's a terrible movie. It's several terrible movies. At least you have. I haven't even seen all the Star Wars. I really actually have been meaning. Prequels. My friends are always memeing them at least for that. For whenever they confidently think they excel in the matters in which they're scoffed at, they do not. This is being secure. And we have this kind of, again, this is a more modern idea of insecure and secure. But Aristotle understood. You're really secure and people laugh at you. Okay. But if you're not totally sure what other people think or how they receive, maybe you have doubt, someone laughs at you, then you become very defensive. And they become angry at friends more than those who are not friends. I don't know. Do you think that's true? Maybe because you expect more from your friend. They trusted you as a friend, and you make love the story. When this random guy on Twitch does it, I don't. Who is he? For they think it is more appropriate for them to be well treated than not. And they become angry at those who have been accustomed to honor or respect them. Instead, they do not. They think they are being treated with contempt by these. Otherwise, they would treat them. I've always said this as a big problem with people, and identify themselves by their beliefs and any counterpoint. Kind of the reason people. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely. I agree with you. People are identified with their beliefs. I don't know if I would see it as. I mean, you definitely can see it as a. I don't think I see it as a. I think I see it just as a condition of. So people's beliefs can change. I know that because my beliefs have radically changed more than once in my life. But when I reflect back on the times my beliefs were changed, it was people who were willing to make a connection with me, and who were willing to see that there was something in what I cared. It wasn't just a kind of proposition that I was adhering. Something that I cared about that they could understand. I see why you care about that, why you're identified with that, but maybe you're not considering some other thing that, or maybe if you took that care in a new direction, you'd actually come to a different. So it's when we respect that care and opinion go together that we're better able to persuade people and better able to understand. I was explaining this in my class the other day. I had a student once in a class. I think we may have even been reading this text, and she was. And this is like, I guess it was 2015, 20. She was like, yeah, I think the wall is a good idea. Donald Trump's border wall. And there were other students in the class who were became immediately very hostile. She had like put up the signal, go, attack. They started being very hostile. And I don't know if I handled the situation really well, but my response was something like, if I remember it, something like, no, everyone calm down a little bit. Like, well, just explain what your reasons are. And her reasons made a lot of sense to me. Though I did disagree with her policy. She was like, well, I'm from a place where I've seen a lot of people from opioid overdose, heroin overdose. And they say the heroin is coming from Mexico, which it was. Well, it is. She's like, so I don't want people around me to die. And I think it makes sense. Stop this stuff coming from Mexico. And that helped me better understand where she was coming. And so then it was more about like, I see why you care about that. I understand why you care. Let's examine whether this policy is a good way to address your concern. But if we had only kind of listened to say, I think the wall is a good idea, and we only went back with her and said, I think the wall is a bad idea, I think the wall is evil, that wouldn't have been argument. We wouldn't have understood each other's concern. So I don't know if it's I think it's a kind of something that maybe does take additional steps. It would be nice if maybe it would be nice if everybody already agreed. But I think that when you have good arguments with people, it's finding the basis of agreement first. And it's often something that you both care about. At the very least, you care about each other enough to have an argument. Try to persuade. That needs to be a before you come in with a baton and hit them over the head with your brilliant argument. So, and they become angry more at those of no account. For anger resulting from being belittled, assumed to be against those who have no right to do it. And inferiors have no right to believe. There's obviously a highly stratified. It's a slave society. So inferiors here, they're slaves, or children, or women, or foreigners. There are a lot more inferiors than there are. I guess that's kind of. And they become angry against friends if these do not speak well of or benefit them, and even more if they do the opposite. And if they are insensitive to those. I see a lot of this on social media. Fake friends, talk behind your back. Toxic. Gotta get rid of those people. And people get very upset by it. As in the case of Plexippus, the Antiphon's tragedy. For lack of sensitivity is a sign of belittling. What we care about, not escape. about does not escape our attention itself is kind of informed by what people care about. Paying attention to those, maybe the things that they're insecure, but also things that affect them in some way. And that might be different from what affects you. So if you want to connect with people, you have to kind of realize that difference. What affects you might not be what affects them. Different circumstances. You got to begin by thinking about the difference. You can't just begin, well, this has always worked for me. And they become angry against those rejoicing at misfortune, and generally taking pleasure in others' misfortune. It is a sign of being either an enemy or a belittler. So people now on Twitter has said you cannot wish for the death of Donald. And there are a lot of people that are doing this. But I think it is people rejoicing at their enemy. They understand their political enemy. Of course we want him dead. Enemy out of someone. So there's this kind of complex negotiation of how emotion should be performed. That's part of the emotion, part of the pain. What is shown and what is not shown. So, and they become angry at those listening to bad things, seeing their bad side. These are similar to belittling. Friends share griefs, and all grieve when they see the faults of those. Even if your friend listens to the, why didn't you just walk away? You know what she's like. Further, they become angry at those belittling them before 5 classes of people. You cannot fault Aristotle for lack of classification. He loves classifies, which I think is one of the reasons that made it very popular. You can always kind of feel smarter by being like, there are 5 classes of belittlers. Which it's probably not. I mean, it's probably a kind of arbitrary. They're not totally unmotivated. It does kind of think them out, coming from somewhere. I don't know final word, but I don't know why, but I saw a lot of weird demon worship. I don't know why either. That's hard to say without more context. Could they have been ironic? Could they have been Satan? Could they? I mean, there's lots of different. What was people trying to communicate? I don't know. And they become angry at those belittling others whom it would be shameful for them not to defend. For example, parents, children, wives, dependents. Someone's like, that's kind of the gesture, like pick on somebody your own side. Like they were praying for him. Yeah, I think every conceivable reaction has been expressed. That's my. He's kind of a lightning rod for emotional expression. Say what they feel about him, how they feel, what he does and says. Emblem of that mood, that public mood of what's going on. People really associate all sorts of things that may or may not really be within his power, with what's really going on. But that's how people understand the moment. People immediately started calling it the Trump era when he was. I wonder if people started calling it the Modi era. Modi was, maybe they did, or like the Duterte era when he was elected. There's something about, of course, it is the United States has a special position, so that might be part of it. I think it maybe also be American journalists are kind of hyper focused on their own, and they become angry at those who do good to others. They do not do it all. For this too is contemptuous, not to think them also worthy of what they do. It was really nice. Gives out cookie. They bring a cookie for. Oh, I forgot to bring a cookie. Even though it's kindness, it's not something that you expect. If it's given to other people, why isn't it for me? Seems like you're slighting me. It goes back to that. Anger is. And forgetfulness is also productive. For example, forgetfulness of names being such a little thing. The forgetfulness, this is such a good, Aristotle is really on the money. The forgetfulness seems to be a sign of belittlement. Forgetfulness occurs through lack of concern. Lack of concern, belittlement. You ever think about how weird it is that you get angry? Don't we just forget naturally? No, it's because we forget what's not important to us. That's the inference. Is that always true? Probably. You can put effort. Well, maybe it did. But you can put effort. Make the effort. Understanding other people. Coming to know. Hopefully the stream is still up. A lot of other things. Okay. I have a friend who can never remember anyone's name, even if he's known them for years, but has an excellent memory when it comes to facts about some insects. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Yeah, and yet, do people get angry at your friend? I think that people probably, my guess is people probably get angry at your friend, even though they're kind of like, maybe that's just how he is. Maybe that's just how his brain is wired, meaning that it can't be changed. But I don't know. I think that there are those real differences between people have. Yeah, people get angry. And so it almost doesn't really matter whether your friend can or cannot remember the names. The fact that he forgets them, we take that as a sign of lack of concern. But people do have real, like, serious, like, you can have facial agnosia where you can't recognize faces. Problem in your frontal temporal lobe, right? Of course, Aristotle doesn't recognize. There are sorts of weird variations in people that mean that they might make a gesture or fail to make a gesture because of something, even a disability. Other people don't recognize it as. So one thing that people can do is kind of expand or try to change the reception of gestures, the meanings of things. So, like, someone who has Tourette's, if we didn't understand Tourette very well, we might say, like, that person's very rude. They're cursing because that might be a tick that they. But if we recognize that tick's physiological and it's not in their control, we would cease to become angry at them. That's kind of the idea. So it doesn't matter how we receive it. And that's one of the things that's important in changing how people publicly about things, coming to a new understanding of what's happening. Some people do tend to take things personally. And I don't. Again, that you could say that's a flaw of people. People should be more stoical. Stoics come after Aristotle. They're often opposed to Aristotle. But Aristotle was known in the various schools of philosophy that developed for being much more than any of the other schools interested in civic life, public life, and interested in emotion, things like that. The Peripatetics school, where the Stoics, the Epicureans, the academicians, they're kind of a little bit more withdrawn. One of the reasons I like Aristotle is that he doesn't shy away from getting his hands dirty, whether it's like in the carcass of a dead bird when he's doing biological, or whether it's within the messy emotion, the life of the polis. He's saying there is something to be learned and understood in all of these various realms. You can't just say, oh well, it's not math, so it's not certain. There's something to be learned. Even though he got a lot of things wrong. You have to actively train yourself to perceive. Yes, but I don't think that you train yourself to perceive things in that way just by saying it's better. I need to not be upset. You do it by maybe analyzing the possibilities of reasons that people might have for acting in that. And when you see more possibilities, you can feel more weight. So we don't get out of our emotions by kind of like icing ourselves off from the world by having a deeper understanding of the possibilities of why people X or Y. That's the Aristotelian framework. Understand more about the world, and you will be freer in your responses to it and in your actions. And so that's one of the reasons I like this text on the emotion. I think that learning about thinking deeply about why people are moved in the ways that they are allows you to respond with a greater degree of freedom. Those other That might be wishful thinking. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people are how they are. Can't educate them. Well, then my life is based. Obviously, I don't want to. So got real there for a second. Great quote. Mind saying it one more time? I don't know what you're referring to, Alan. You can just play it back on the VOD, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'll make a highlight if you let me know later. It's around an hour and 26 minutes into this thing that we've barely cracked the page. I'm not going to do the whole thing today. But anger is a really important one. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of his analysis of the rest of the. And some of them he kind of goes over more quickly. Anger's, for some reason, very important to Aristotle. So at one and the same time, then the persons at whom anger is directed and the dispositions of those angry kinds of causes have been stated. Kind of a boring lecture. And it is clear that it might be needful in a speech to put the audience in the state of mind of those who are inclined to anger and show one's opponents as responsible for what are the causes of anger. So this is what the rhetorical side of it. I have to kind of create a situation in speech. People didn't witness what happened, and even if they did, how do they understand it? What's the history? We mostly relate to things, to the affairs of the ta pragmata. We talk about being pragmatists. Pragmata, were for Aristotle and in Greek, could mean literally things, but also mean affairs. So affairs kind of have the structure of things in story. They're kind of objects that we relate ourselves to, that we see as part of how others act and how we might act. And so in that, we have to kind of learn how to show things that produce the kind of response that we think, either that we want for our own agenda, but also that makes it intelligible to us. I don't know how to feel about this. Sometimes we say that when we're confused. I don't know how to feel about it. Maybe it's just because I don't know how to feel about it because it's really complicated, it's really ambiguous. There's many competing motives. It's very involved. But sometimes I'm just like, I can't really understand what people's motives were here. Why would they do that? It's confusing. When you watch a bad movie, or you're just like, the villains are, you can tell when they're supposed to be villains, but you're like, I don't really understand what's motivating them. Maybe actually makes it hard to understand the plot of the movie. So, all right. Continue on a bit longer. We gotta at least get to calmness, because Aristotle thought of these. I probably should have said. He thought of these emotions kind of in pairs. That being able to provoke anger, you might also want to, if you find your audience as already angry, maybe against you, oh my god, they're going to sentence me to death, then I need to know how to make them calm. And for him, these pairs, it doesn't always work out nice, perfectly. Sometimes it's a little bit forced. Here, anger and calmness are kind of pairs. Hobbes defined anger. Thomas Hobbes, anger is sudden carriage. I quite like it. Sudden. That I'm ready to act. Calm someone is to kind of put them in a state where time kind of slows down when you're anger. It's like moving towards something, a desire for return. And when it's not, when I can't move towards it, I get more frustrated when someone prevents me from drinking when I'm thirsty. Aristotle's example. I get more angry. Builds up, it's a crescendo. Or it's a toilet filled with more extra water, according to Conrad Lorenz, I guess. I don't know. But I shouldn't diss Lorenz. He had some good. His basis of thinking about it was animals, and so is Darwin's, of showing the relationship between human emotions and what we observe in the animal kingdom. There's a lot of similarities. That should tell us something. That's not what Aristotle's focused on. Does Aristotle think that animals have emotion? I think he does, but he doesn't really talk about it in the rhetoric. Not important. You're not speaking to animals, usually. Okay, so, praotes. I don't think I've seen this word. You don't come across this word. And Greeks don't talk a lot about calmness. Here we go. Since becoming calm is the opposite of becoming angry, and anger the opposite of calmness, the state of mind of those who are calm should be grasped by a speaker and toward whom they are calm. I think this is maybe like the weakest part of Aristotle, trying to make things into opposites. It's maybe like making it like a little bit too logical. And I've asked people before, what do you think is the opposite of anger? And people have given all sorts of different answers. And it's hard for me to say why Aristotle's was better than theirs. I don't really know on what basis it's opposite. But it does seem to me like a way of opposing, opposite in the sense of it opposes anger. So if I can turn someone from anger back into calm, I've kind of transformed their emotion into a different direction. Maybe that's what he said. So let calmness be defined as a settling down and a quieting of anger. If you define it that way, I guess it's the opposite of anger. If then people become angry at those little, and belittling is a voluntary thing, evidently they are calm toward those doing none of these things or doing them involuntarily or seemingly so. So if I'm trying to calm someone down, that's when I step on someone's foot. I didn't mean to. I'm showing the situation in a new light by saying, oh, it was involuntary. Therefore, I'm not belittling. So transforming the judgment here of someone who thinks that I've insulted them into some one where I didn't do it purposely or I didn't do it at all. Oh, no, it wasn't meant as insult. I think it's actually calm. This is what calming means. And they are calm toward those intending the opposite of them. And they are calm toward all who regard them as they themselves are. For no one is thought to believe. I feel like we wouldn't agree with that. So you see there's a footnote here. There are, at least in modern times, insecure persons who constantly belittle themselves. And at a more sophisticated level, there exists the type of ironic person. So Kennedy even felt motivated here. He's like, I can't let this one go. Because people clearly do belittle themselves. Have you seen a Woody Allen movie? But yeah, so the kind of neurotic type, maybe is familiar to us, is at least not prominent. So there you go. There's one difference. And they are calm toward those who admit intent, having belittled someone. For regarding the other's distress as just retribution, they cease their anger at provoked it. So if I think it's justified, happened, like, oh, it's no longer an insult. So one way is not to say, oh, I didn't do it, or to say, oh, I didn't mean to do it. To say, yeah, I did it, and he deserved it, that asshole. That's another way to calm people down. Be like, oh, okay. You didn't see what happened before the tape started. That kind of thing. A sign of this is seen in the punishment of slaves. Well, here we go. For we punish all the more those who argue and deny, but we cease our wrath towards those who confess, justly. So there's a power dynamic involved in these. This is obviously an extreme power dynamic. Aristotle is quite comfortable. This is obviously deeply uncomfortable. Quite comfortable here addressing this all. You know what we all do when we punish our slaves? How the society was organized at the time. And slaves had no status. They had no status. So, for the point of view of Aristotle, slaves can't really get angry. How can you insult a slave? They're already as low as they can go. You insult someone by saying that they are a slave. Aristotle has some weird views on slave politics. Slaves are slaves by nature. Very weird stuff. So his thinking, I have to say, was very confused around the institution. Not only because he didn't have like historical distance but even in his time, Aristotle had very strange things. The reason is that deny clear evidence is disrespectful. One of my favorite examples of this is my teacher was a teacher. And I think this is when she was teaching 6th grade, which is an American for, I don't know, other people would call it like middle school, pre-secondary education, kind of primary education. It's like 12 years old. And there's some report that she assigned, and one of the kids who, you know, they could already tell was kind of taking a different path. Things didn't end up well, fortunately. He had a hard life. But he did a report about Louis Pasteur, and even at that time, it wasn't hard to, like, if you do, like, the first Google result, it was. So she showed it to him, and here's the thing I printed off the internet, here's your report. Wow, that's crazy. The internet copied off me. And, like, obviously, that's really disrespectful. But it was pretty effective. she didn't know how to respond. She was just like, no. I mean, she like gave him a punishment or whatever for plagiarizing, but I think it's kind of a funny story where he was just like, he wasn't going to accept even like the most incriminating evidence. So that's an example of not respecting clear. The internet copied off me. Okay. People are also calm towards those who humble themselves toward them and do not contradict them. Yeah. For they seem to admit being inferior. And inferiors are afraid, and no one who is afraid belittles. I wonder if that's true. But maybe not to your. Someone's afraid of you, maybe talk behind you. But that's not what he means. That anger ceases toward those who humble themselves is evident even in the case of dogs. There we go. We do get some animals in here. I forgot this line. Who do not bite those sitting. That's a very. That seems like a really specific claim about dogs. That he has a footnote here again. Kennedy is like, in the Odyssey, Odysseus tries this strategy when it comes to dogs. As in that case, it probably should not be counted on work unless the dog's master. This is a very weird example. Dogs don't bite people. I don't know. I don't know enough about dog behavior to know. Factor. I don't think I've ever been bitten by a dog sitting down. So and they are calm towards those who are serious with them, and when they are serious. So they think that being serious, and they are being serious and not showing. So if we're like both kind of on the same level of seriousness, you're not making fun of me. Therefore, and they are calm toward those who have done greater kindness in the past than in front. Calm toward those who are begging a favor and entreating them not to be angry. Humbler. It's all about status here. Someone who's making you angry is someone who's putting themselves above you. And someone who's kind of calming you is someone who's putting below you. I don't think we like to think in those terms. That kind of rigid hierarchy. Especially when we like pluralistic and democratic and egalitarian. But I can't help but wonder if maybe a lot of people do respond to other people. That person's kind of taking on uppity. You're going above. Ought to be. I'm angry at them. That person's. I like him. He's a good guy. A lot of dark stuff that's mixed up. How people are different from them. So as a whole, things producing calmness should be looked on at the basis of their opposites. All right, fine. They are calm also toward those whom they fear and respect, as long as they are so disposed. They do not become angry. It is impossible to be afraid and become angry. That's a very interesting. It's possible to be afraid and angry at the same time. What do you think? And toward those who have acted in angry or are less angry. For they do not seem to have acted by belittling. No one belittles when angry. Belittling is painless. Anger is a comfort. They can be both. Yeah, I wonder why he thinks that. If you think about Hobbes' definition, anger is sudden carriage, then maybe that would be like, yeah, you just by definition can't. But I think maybe that shows a difference in what they. Anger is a kind of readiness to act. Fear is kind of hard to retreat, and so if you think about it in those terms, maybe they really do seem. But of course, he's not saying that anger and fear are opposites. He's already claimed that. It's a weird moment, but I am having trouble thinking of a time I was afraid and then became angry. Sometimes I was afraid and then became angry and ceased to be. I can't think of a time when I remained as fearful as. It does seem like maybe there's something in like anger changes what we're afraid of. It's not going to mess with me. Sometimes we use anger as like try to move ourselves into anger so we're no longer. So I don't know, maybe there is. I'm suspicious of it. It's a general claim. I tend to be suspicious of all general. That means that Aristotle's a good sparring companion. He makes a lot of general. Very clearly wrong. Like dogs can do things like that. Hey, welcome to the stream. We're talking about anger. We're talking about Aristotle. Do you think you can be angry, afraid? State of mind of those who are calm. Now, again, we're going back into the state of mind. Have the causes. What's the state of mind? Who are we calm toward? Kind of a weird way to frame it, but that's how I'm thinking about it. It is clear that people are calm when they're in a state of mind angry. For example, in play, in laughter, at a feast, in prosperity, in success, in fulfillment, generally in the absence of pain, and in reasonable expectation. I kind of like this line. When we have some reasonable expectation, I can kind of see what neither afraid. Further, they're calm if their anger has cooled with time, is not in its first. Time makes anger. Think again about Hobbes. It's sudden courage. Well, it can't be sudden forever. It starts to change. Greater anger toward a different person or vengeance already taken on another person also causes anger. I really don't believe that one. I really don't believe it. But, I have to say, I'm inexperienced in vengeance. Haven't done it a whole lot. Who am I to say? Thus, when someone asked Philocrates, the people of Athens were angry at him, why do you not defend yourself? He wisely said, not yet. But when then? I see someone else has. So, and then we have a note here. Largely through the efforts of Demosthenes, who was a great orator. He was the guy, if you've heard the term Philippics, he was the guy who composed the Philippics. We shouldn't wait for Philip of Macedon, that was his father, to come in and invade. We need to go out and attack. Philocrates was prosecuted for bribery in peace negotiations carried on between Macedon. He escaped into exile and was condemned to death in absentia. This date is consistent with the revision of the Rhetoric. This sentence is a little bit strange, though. What does he mean? But when? When are you going to defend yourself? When I see someone else has been. It's almost like he's identifying himself with those other people. Those other people are more important to me than defending myself. For people become calm whenever they have spent their anger on, which happened in the case of Pergophilus. For though the Athenians were more angry at him than Callisthenes, they let him go because they condemned Callisthenes to death on the. There's also that story in the Bible where where they're trying to Jesus is going to be crucified. Oh well, we have a tradition because people are like, Pontius Pilate, we don't really want to do this. This is kind of bad policy. We don't want to get involved in this local affair. And so they're like, we have a tradition where we release one prisoner. They're like, what about Jesus? And then they also bring out this other guy, Barabbas, and they're like, free Barabbas. And it's they pay. It's like, okay, they free him. Well, now we have to go. Wait, Barabbas was a murderer, but now we got to go. So it goes in the other direction too. When people become calm if they think themselves have done wrong and suffer justly, for anger does not arise against justice, nor against what people think they have appropriately suffered. Hard to get angry if I think I deserved it. I don't know, maybe you disagree. I deserved that, but still, what could you say? Once you've admitted that you've deserved it, can you get angry? I don't know. No. I think maybe if you just don't think about it, you shouldn't have done that. But if you don't think about it in terms of deserving or not deserving, maybe you can get angry. I think once you admit that you've deserved something, it's hard to get angry. That was implicit in the definition of anger. Thus, one should first chastise in word, for even slaves are less indignant. Again, a little unsavory mention here. In a society, this is kind of important to remember. Highly stratified, highly masculine. So but he's saying, okay, yeah, just chastise people in words. If they accept that kind of punishment, they don't need to escalate. Okay. Also, people are calm when they think that their victims will believe who is the cause of their suffering, that it is retribution for anger is a personal fear from the devil. Thus the verse says, thus the verse, say it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, was rightly composed. Odysseus would not have been avenged, Polyphemus the Cyclops had not realized both from whom and why this you have to know this story, right? So it's one of the most famous stories from the Odyssey, when they arrive on the isle where there's the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and eventually they blind him, Odysseus and his crew. He eats a few of the crew members. They blind him, and they have this crazy way of getting out of his cave by tying themselves to the bottom of sheep. It's hard to imagine how big these sheep were. I guess they're the sheep Cyclops. They're probably big. And he says, he's like, who blinded me? Who blinded me? And Odysseus responds, Utis, or no one blinded you. And then Polyphemus, who's maybe not the brightest bulb, starts shouting to the other Cyclops over, no one blinded me, no one blinded me, right? He doesn't get they're like, okay, so no one comes to his aid. But once Odysseus is in the water and there's something, what's your name? Like, who really blinded me? And it was Odysseus. He needs to let them know who the revenge came from. Otherwise, the act wouldn't be complete. You have to know why revenge was taken for revenge to be someone randomly dying. I don't know. You see these a lot in like action movies, like the boss. I'm gonna do. You gotta let them know this kind of stuff. Again, I don't have a whole lot of experience. Not my bag, but thus in wanting Achilles to cease his anger against Hector, once he was dead, poet spoke well, for it is unseemly to rage at senseless. And this goes back to the Iliad, where Achilles, Hector is a great opponent. He drags his body, dead body around. Very gruesome image. And even Homer's like Achilles, kind of a little bit too far, seemingly to rage. It matters that your kind of opponent recognizes your anger. And you need recognition from your, which is kind of a weird thing. Our enemy isn't just then someone we hold in contempt. We want them to see and experience our anger, to see that we have status and that we can inflict pain on them. I don't know. It's a weird part of human emotion. Clearly, then, those wishing to instill calmness in it all speak from these, produce such a feeling in them, having made them regard those whom they are angry as mere persons to give respect, or benefactors, or involuntary actors, or is very grieved by what they have. So we got to the end of calmness. We did talk about ethos, anger, calmness. I think I'm going to stop the stream because there's no way I'm going to get through the whole rest of it. Not even halfway through at this point. I'll probably do maybe two more streams, and that you can look for these streams on YouTube channel, Rhetoric. They get put up there usually the same day. And if you're thinking about if you want to watch live again the streams on Aristotle's Rhetoric discussion of the I might be able to do the other two this week, possibly tomorrow. Do the next, possibly Fridays again. So if you have any suggestions about the stream, about the channel, about the, please let me know. Also, feel free to join. Everyone who's watching is already find link to on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv. Coming, and I hope you stay calm. Time is that